right, it's recording.
All right. Hey, Arv.
Hey, Fitz. How
So,
you doing today?
I'm okay. I think we spent the last 15 to 20 minutes figuring out how to record ourselves. It seems like dating us a little bit.
Yeah.
We're we're getting old.
I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is that we're doing it. We're actually recording it. We've been talking about this for a long time, recording a podcast or doing something. So I'm
Yeah.
just happy it's getting out there.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I'm excited for this.
And I
Um,
think I'll just say what sort of inspired me to retext you. We met like a couple weeks ago to talk about this and say like, hey, we should be getting our voice out there a little bit more. And I think you've been doing it a little more on LinkedIn after that. But for me, just also thinking a little bit after, the election just generally and having a little bit of impetus to say, I think I've been wasting a lot of time listening to other people talk about stuff
yeah.
for a long time. Not necessarily wasting time, but I've been spending a lot of time doing that. And I think coming out of that, I feel this both media void a little bit that I don't want to re-enter that cycle again, but also this like I think we should be putting some content out there and not just ingesting it all the time.
Yeah, I've had this feeling for a long time, and it's just the natural order of things. Whenever you have these like call it YouTube or Instagram or podcasts, um, it's like a very de minimis percentage of people who are either on the platforms or consuming that are also creating. It's like 3 or 4%. It's not even like 80-20 rule. It's like 95-5 or
Dude, I
something.
think it's like 99-1 probably or
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's always the case. But I think there is something scary about talking about things publicly. There's
Hmm.
something about it that sort of, you know, we we have everyone has thoughts and thinks a lot of things every day, but actually sharing parts of that with the world is and putting it on the internet and for anyone to see and that sort of thing has been a I don't think the younger people nowadays care about that as much as we do. I think they like 50% of like kids coming out of high school or something like want to be influencers or whatever, like that's their goal in life.
They kind of grew up that way, right? Like putting
They
content out
grew
was
up that
very
way,
common.
yeah.
Yeah, to their local network at least. And
Yeah, but I
yeah,
think our generation is like it's definitely different. I think people are a little bit more um, apprehensive to put their thoughts out there, and like there's this there's also this perfectionism a little bit, like, oh, if I put something out there, it has to be really curated and beautiful, and it has to have like this amazing thing. And I think that is not the case. I think I would bet, I don't know the numbers, but I would bet that if you look at the younger generation, they're just more willing to just be like, okay, TikTok, let's go, like whatever.
yeah.
Um,
I
so
think that I mean, there's a few things you said there which I like really make me think about this too. One is I think it has been a long time thinking, oh, I want to do something, and it's that like perfection gap where it's like, oh, it's not going to be perfect, so I can't put anything out there. That's the starting point, and then you never start, which is a huge problem because you just think, oh, it's not going to be perfect. But the other thing is like, I actually think, and I kind of wanted to talk to you a little about the election because I think you have like a very unique perspective on it, and I've also been thinking about it for a while. But on Pod Save, they were mentioning like, oh, we don't even know who we would put in front of Joe Rogan. I can't even think of like 4 or 5 Democrats that I would put there. And part of the reason they were saying that is like, oh, well, you don't know what to say where you wouldn't get like uh, beat up or canceled by like the other half of the party, right? And it's like this culture. I feel like also it's a very Democrat culture where I'm not saying that I've deeply involved in the Democrat side of things or anything like that, but it's that side of the culture that I think actually like the Trump election is a counterculture too, which is like you don't want to be so uh, beholden to your words that oh you said this once on this one podcast and therefore forever you're canceled or whatever it is. So I think there's almost like that feeling of you're putting something out there into the internet or into the world, it's going to live there.
yeah.
Do I have to over curate what I'm going to say to make sure that what I say out loud isn't taken in the wrong context, or I might in a year think something different and I want to have the freedom to go express that in a year. I don't want to be stuck to that. And so that's part of that trepidation.
Yeah, and I never really understood it and why it was like a First Amendment problem, because like Elon is on about how this is like a freedom of speech issue and people feel like they have to, whatever, like can't say things or whatever. And um, I never really got that until recently, where I was like, oh yeah, actually, I am kind of restricting what I would say. I am sugarcoating everything I would I truly feel. Um, and that's not really good, I think. But I think that there's a way to the whole like Twitter and X, whatever you call it nowadays. It's like that side of things is like it's totally wild west, and I think that I understand the need to kind of like have freedom of speech, but I think that there's also just like a bad job of keeping things out that people like generally agree you should keep out, like things that, like, pornography and whatnot, right? Like you got to be able to keep that out while still allowing for freedom of, like, because it looks, when you log in, it just
Yeah.
looks like almost like a cesspool, right? It's
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah. It's like
it's
there's
changed
definitely
a
like
lot.
yeah.
It's changed a lot. So
I mean, there's definitely like I think that we can probably if we do this show for a while, we can reach some middle ground balance where we don't try to draw on either extreme, but we just say what we're thinking. I think that'd be ideal. But like it's also that these extreme things kind of they're the what generates the most content. It's like bad incentive model for the media where they just want to get clicks and drive anger because anger drives views. And honestly, I think like a ton of the problem is like that all these media sources are just trying to go to the extreme. And it's like basically anyone that thinks they have the reality of what's going on in America or the world is just wrong because everything you watch
this, I
is
think the
just
social media sources are incentivized to go to the extreme a little bit because they want to grab you and make you focus and see and watch and keep scrolling and go to the next video, um, and get like really into rabbit holes. Um, but I think the traditional media, which is, CNN, whatever, like things on TV or whatever, they're the opposite. Like they're not on the extreme. They're just trying to sugarcoat everything to not try to offend anybody, and by not trying to offend anybody, you're offending people in some weird in a weird way, right? Like, um, you can't sugarcoat life that much. And so, I mean, not sugarcoat, that's the wrong word, but it's just like you can't have this desire to be so inoffensive. And if something offends someone, it's like a big deal. Oh, this person offended this person. It's like a big deal,
mm, mm.
like,
But yeah, I think you're right. I think though that there's definitely an element of that, but there's also an element of like they do have a desire to show things that are engaging, and engaging content tends to be often negative, often conflict driven or like crime driven or whatever it is, and like that drives a narrative that things are always getting worse. And in some ways, what like I think what the Republicans and what Trump has run on really well, and what the Democrats have been forced in a weird way to defend is like they've been forced to defend the status quo and been forced to defend the system. Whereas like there are problems with the system, he's been good at calling them out. Some of them are really good critiques, and the Democrats, almost in order not to agree with him, have been like, oh, reflexively, like everything's good. Actually, the system's good. Everything's okay. And like that's where I feel like yeah, like the sides have been set up in a way where like the traditional media, I think you're right, they're like sugarcoat a lot, but we've also have a political system where I feel like it's been set up in a way where one side kind of is in critique mode of the government and of everything that's going on, and the other side is like in inherently in defense mode of what's going on, and then it's hard to represent that position fairly in like a media environment also.
yeah. And I think that's what fundamentally people, I think people actually agree on the underlying problem, which is that there are a lot of parts of the government that don't work for us. So I think at a baseline level, if you told that to someone, they would probably agree. Um,
Hmm.
but I think, when you have the government that's in power and you have all these different agencies or whatever that have created over time, now they're, like you said, they're forced into defending a lot of things that maybe they shouldn't, right? Like they're forced into defending like maybe institutions or things that they may not care for, and
Yeah.
they're afraid of. I mean, and they're afraid to offend, so much. Like what if we just got rid of certain things, or whatever. It's like I think that people at least want to have that conversation rather than saying I don't want to. I will
Yeah.
change anything.
Because it's actually to like exactly when you said that, my brain went to, well, that feels like a really Republican position. Like the statement you said that parts of the government don't work well for me, but it's not a really Republican feeling. I think it's an over across the board feeling.
Yes,
The thing is, Democrats want to respond to that by defending the government and saying we can make it better, and Republicans want to respond to that by saying I think that we should just eliminate those parts of the government that are not working well.
and
And
there's got to be a happy medium, right? Like you
yeah,
can't just get rid of everything, but you also can't just say that we're keeping everything and we're adding more every single year.
you can't just reflexively say it's a slippery slope. You can't get rid of anything because if you get rid of that, then what's going to happen? And
Yeah,
that's the thing. That's the part I do feel like Democrats have gotten stuck in doing, where they've been like reflexively defending things that actually sometimes aren't working really well. Like probably the government is too bloated. The government infrastructure is too bloated. The bureaucracy is too bloated. Like you should actually you should be engaging in a conversation about where you can get efficiency out of the government. It shouldn't just be like, oh, Elon Musk is going to run an efficiency council. And the only way that I'm going to get efficiency out of the government is to go so far to vote for like eliminate 80% of the government. I would love for the Dems to come out and say, like, hey, actually, we're for efficiency too. Here's the areas we think we can cut and the areas that we think we can make more streamlined. But you're not getting that from them.
and I
So then
think
you're
you
forced to
have to
make a
get there
hard
because
decision.
you have to get there because in terms of our deficit and how much we spend and how much we borrow to spend that,
Yeah.
like the incoming revenue to the government doesn't cover everything. Our tax revenue doesn't cover everything, so we have to go borrow money to go and spend on on all of our programs, and that can keep on going if your credit's really good and growth is really good. GDP is going up, great, 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 but there's a point at which the level of debt that we get into as a country, um, pretty soon it's not going to be good because we've already seen, like our creditors not be as excited. Like at least what I've heard is like China's not as excited to keep buying U.S. government bonds, right? Like, um, and things like that. So, when you've got like so many trillions and trillions of dollars in debt, and every so often there's a congressional vote to increase the debt ceiling. What does that mean? Increase the ability to take on more debt.
Yeah.
Um, that has not stopped since I've been able to vote. like
Yeah.
that
And
is,
neither party now is focused on it, which is the bizarre thing to me. Like,
yeah,
in fact, conservative party, which used to be like quote unquote deficit hawk, but I don't think they actually were. I mean, they might have spoken to it, but their plans also increase the deficit, maybe more than the Democratic plan. So to me, I'm left with this weird thing where I'm concerned about it the same way you are. I don't see how you couldn't be. Yet it feels like everyone in control doesn't care about it. And that leaves me thinking, A, should I not care about it? Like, is it actually not important? And maybe I'm overjudging it for some reason. Or B, they're too short term thinking and it's like just benefiting them in the short term. And we're going to be screwed in the long term. And I don't know what it is. And I haven't heard like a good theory of the case either way, actually.
yeah. I mean, I think it's not good, right? Like, imagine you're running your own household, right? And you go into you're willing to go into some debt. Like we all take on a mortgage. Most people take on a mortgage. They
Yeah.
they get a loan for getting their car, whatever. But um, we're at borrowing levels that the U.S. has never been in, and in terms of the multiple on GDP,
Yeah.
right? And that is, think of it as like we're highly leveraged, and so any shock to the system, and this is where the whole the United States is like this bastion of the world economy. It's sort of it's been the case for a long time and it continues to be the case, but I think like this is where like it's probably an Achilles heel for us is if some shock to the system happens where we can no longer pay our debts or people we get essentially downgraded in terms of debt worthiness,
Hmm.
and that will be a problem for the whole world.
Yeah. And when you look at the budget now, I think the other sad thing that I kind of blame both sides for this, but I think Democrats are actually pretty guilty of this. Is anytime people say, "Hey, we actually probably need to cut spending in Social Security or Medicare or areas like that. We need to increase the age for these programs or shrink them." That becomes like an immediate political attack point that these people are trying to take away your Social Security. And the reality is, and this is true on the other side for defense, where we absolutely need to be more effective and efficient with defense spending. It's such a massive portion of the budget. Like if you actually want to do what you're saying and live within the means of the tax of the system and actually reduce the deficit, you
Yeah.
actually need to cut like these three things across the board pretty, or you need to reform them. And we just don't have a political system where you can say that out loud
But I
without
think
getting.
this is a good debate to have, because now we're debating about something important, which is, I think that there's different ways to cut. So you can say that, there's an 80-20 rule in how much we spend. There's certain programs that take an enormous amount of the resources,
Mhm.
right? So 20% of the program taking up 80% of the budget, so roughly, right? That's probably the case. So do you start with that, or do you start with the other, even though it's a smaller piece, like just say, hey, there's certain things that aren't important, right? Like these three things get the most budget because they're the most important things, and we should just put all of it in those things, right? Like, is that how it works? Like, I think there's a healthy debate around, like, what are the things that you'd cut, and I think that's where, one of the proposals coming out of the Trump camp, and basically this commission or whatnot, is like, get rid of the Department of Education, right? Like that's what they want to cut. Um, I don't know what the answer is for Democrats. Like, what do they want to cut? I don't think they want to cut anything in
I
general.
mean, I think they should want to cut the military. And again, that's politically, let's take all the political calculus out of it, right? For me, it's like you want,
I think that
since
you see
since
Donald Trump
nuclear,
talking about that defense, like no going to war, no wars thing.
well,
That message is coming from Trump, not from the Democrats.
that's no, he's trying not to spend on wars, but he's not trying to decrease the military budget. I mean, in his term, I don't think he did that at all. In his
Yeah,
term, so like here's what I would say if I was like a middle of the road kind of, well, since I think I am, but let's say I would personally, I would increase taxes on the wealthy, the hyper wealthy. Okay, I think
yeah.
you have to
Which
do
is not
that.
that's not going to happen in this term.
Well, it should
Yeah,
happen, but
should. Yeah.
like I certainly wouldn't provide a tax cut to the wealthy. I don't think that makes any sense. But I would increase taxes on the wealthy. I would decrease military spending since the nuclear deterrence age. We haven't needed the number of you don't need new nuclear arms. You just need to upgrade and maintain the nuclear arms you have. And I would say the military has typically actually requested less money than they're granted because you have all these military projects that are like they are propping up communities because they're still building things for the military, but in reality you have to face that kind of head on and be like, okay, we don't need certain parts of the military budget anymore, and it's such a huge part of the budget. I think you got to cut it
You're right.
down. And to your point, yeah, you have to stop intervening in foreign
I would
conflicts.
I would I would venture to say that military spending is going to go up, probably, because I mean, look at the market, right? Like Palantir is like a really good example of a company that sells into military, right?
Yeah, but
Uh,
where can you get more efficient to that point? Like maybe you're building targeting drones, or like there's a lot of technology coming into the military where I think you're probably going to see. I mean, this is
but,
kind of
but
sad,
the
and I don't know
problem
if
is the argument to the latter is like we're going to need to increase our capital expenditure on the whatever research and stuff that
the
we're
tech.
doing, and that's
Yeah.
what it's always been. Like we need to increase our capital, like, on in like the research stuff, and they just keep increasing the budget based on that.
But that's a good spend because then you're actually developing things that can go into the market eventually. The thing that I wouldn't be spending a ton of money on is like I'm gonna, continue to maintain all of my tanks. Like, I think new warfare, modern warfare, has to be evolving at the rate.
Yeah,
Like we do a lot. I think in the and by the way, I don't know this for sure. But I'm just saying, if you look at the military budget, you have to cut like 20% of the military budget. You just have to figure out where it is. You need to cut it. Then you have to probably age increase Social Security and Medicare to like 72 or 75 or something, 70, whatever it
yeah,
is.
because life
Then you have to
expectancy is going up, right? People
yeah,
are
because life
working.
expectancy is going up, so you have to tier that in over time, and then you have to cut a ton out of the federal bureaucracy. You have to, and I think like my theory of the case there would be the federal government is really really good at handing out money, like distributing money directly to people. They're really good at sending money. to people or to agencies, organizations, and we really shouldn't be doing almost anything other than that. Like fundamental research to me should be university driven and privatized for the most part and funded. Like funding should go to those agencies, but we shouldn't be doing like fundamental cancer research within the government. That should be done at university level and so we should cut like we should look to the government and cut
Mhm.
most of those things because that's what
Like
balloons and
a health
balloons.
budget, like the health or whatever uh,
Yeah, like
research
we're
budget.
very good at distributing money. That's what I
But like
think the
but
government
that's
is.
the thing though, is that the universities doing research are getting most of their funding from the government. Like all
Great.
these
Keep doing that. But then
those,
that's in their bureaucracy. Like
yeah.
you're doing grant
No,
review, but you're not doing the
oh,
research, is what I'm saying.
is the government doing a lot of research themselves?
I think the government does do a lot of research. Like the National Institutes of Health, for example, does a lot of research.
Mm,
Like you have DARPA does a lot of research. I'm not saying like, and obviously I'm probably very naive about this, but to me, those are the types of things where you're like building in a new agency. Now suddenly you have to hire a bunch of people into that agency. Suddenly it has to get run federally. And like the government just it's not good at running things like that. I think it's just much better at distributing money and allocating funding and then
yeah,
collecting.
like I think that's kind of happening in weird ways now, where you're having um, like SpaceX, for example. Like NASA was doing all this research on rockets and whatnot, right? But now SpaceX is doing a lot of they're a private company, but that's been essentially outsourced from the government. The government gives money to it and buys things from them, but it's uh it's a privately run business.
Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect example. Like, if you look at, I mean, Elon, to his credit, has done a lot of, I think, what the government would have wanted to do with incentives, but done it as a private company, but taken a ton of government incentives. This is like a great example. He's done this with electric cars. He used a ton of California incentives, a ton of federal incentives, but he built a private company. SpaceX used a ton of government contracts, but like even, the a lot of most of his companies are built like that. And yeah, that's I think that I mean I would need to go. Might be fun next time we do this to go through like a government budget calculator together and like see
Yeah,
what we might. That'd be a fun exercise for us to do on a screen.
Google it.
Um, but yeah, I think that that's I mean, the real problem is nobody's having this conversation like at all. In and what we're gonna
I
do
think
next.
they are, dude. I think that's we're just. I mean, Democrats had just never have had this
But
conversation.
Republicans aren't either, dude. Look at the deficit increase under Trump in first term, and what he's proposing is going to increase it by way more than Biden did in his term. With the tax cuts that he's proposing. Like the tax
Yeah,
cuts are disproportionately to the rich,
yeah,
massively, skewed. And that's actually one reason I wanted Kamala to win this election was actually so that those tax cuts just didn't get re reapplied because they're so dramatically rich based and like trickle
yeah.
down
And
to
whatever
us.
tariffs he's collecting for the tariff increase isn't going to cover costs, and it's going to impact importers. It's not going to impact the
Yeah,
Chinese are not going to directly pay for it.
no, it's
Importers,
the U.S. consumer that pays for it, right?
and then yeah, and importers are going to eventually pass that along to the
That's
distributors, and distributors are going to pass it along to the consumer.
exactly. So what do you end up doing? You end up taxing the middle class more. You've given a huge tax cuts to the wealthy. So your theory of the case there is that the wealthy are going to spend that money back. But if you look at it like the incremental savings the wealthy get is not enough for them to change behavior. Like the billionaire class doesn't care if they get $1 million tax cut, but that $1 million tax cut is massively substantial to like if you do it to enough rich people, that's very costly. And so it doesn't drive enough behavior is what I'm saying. You should be giving that disproportionately the other way.
Yeah, yeah, and that's where there's a fundamental disagreement, and that's where Bernie and Trump supporters kind of mix a little bit in a weird way.
Yeah, yeah. But the one thing that I think one of the driving things that people feel for Trump, and one of the things that, I've come to terms with over the last couple of days and feeling like, okay, I could be excited for a Trump term is he's such a wild card that you feel like maybe he does an amazing job. Like, I actually have no idea. Like, maybe he will look at the
Well,
deficit and be like,
yeah, and I sent this out to our group, which is that I feel like kind of excited in some way that Elon is going to be there.
yeah,
Um, Even though he's kind of a very divisive figure and he says a lot of dumb shit, um, I think that it could be good. It could
Could
be a
be
net
good.
positive. RFK, I'm not so excited about,
Not
but
either.
I think that's kind of going to be weird, weird AF.
I agree.
But Elon, I'm actually kind of open to that.
I think the fundamental difference between the two for me is like Elon has based all of his companies and his ideas off of like fundamental physics and real science, and RFK is like driven by a lot of fake science and conspiracy, and like that
There's
leads
also
to,
a world where they're both fired in a year.
dude, the over under on them having fallouts, especially Elon Trump,
Yeah.
is like
I
less than
mean,
a year and
he's had fallouts with every other person in his
a half.
cabinet.
Absolutely, they're gonna have a fallout in a year and a half. But I am excited about that, and part of my like real hesitancy with Trump was that I was really worried about the environment. And Elon being on board does make me think like, dude, Elon has a huge financial incentive for like electric cars to become a bigger thing. Like he has a huge financial
Yeah.
incentive for solar to keep driving. Like, so
Tesla's
I
mission
just
statement is to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy.
exactly,
And
exactly
he's
right.
the
So
guy that Trump is like getting excited about, which is like, I mean, I think he's gotten Trump excited about him for a completely different reason, which is that he bought Twitter and that he is this like rich billionaire. That's why Trump is excited. But if he somehow can sneak his agenda about sustainability in there, that would be epic.
yeah, yeah, it's kind of who has Trump's ear. And the last thing, I mean, I'll just say on excitement for Trump is that projecting strength is valuable and projecting chaos is valuable. Whether or not he means to, he's so unpredictable that on the foreign stage, it is like you don't know if this dude's going to launch a nuke tomorrow or something.
And
Having
that's what
that
we have now.
level
Yeah.
of unpredictability is actually really, really amazing from a negotiating perspective. And the funny thing is, like, I'm not sure he's intends it or not. Him being so erratic makes it so that, like,
He
if I'm
literally he has such a thin skin. It's about who pisses him off that day, and that's how he reacts to it. But and that's scary. But like you said, there's a silver lining there, right? It's like
yeah,
it makes you hard to negotiate with.
you can't negotiate with a crazy person without being fearful that they'll do something crazy. And so I over time have given him more credit. Like I think he's smarter about this kind of negotiating stuff than we think, and his displays
We
of
live
like
in I mean we've for the last 10 years we've lived in a bubble where he's the devil, enemy number 1, right? And I think that that's warranted in terms of his rhetoric because his rhetoric is really bad. But when you look at the underlying things that he does, and if even if you like pull his supporters, I think there's this sentiment that like they don't really pay attention to what he says in these rallies. Meanwhile, the media is only concerned about that.
hmm hmm
They're only concerned about what's going on in the rallies. They don't tell about what he did, negotiated this, did that as much. It's like these sound bites of him jerking off the microphone.
yeah,
Like
it's that he's such a bad person, dude. That's the problem. He's such a bad person, like morally. He's morally
he has
completely
no
bad,
moral compass. Yeah.
and he's completely stokes division with his language. Like, and that's really scary. But then he does have some positives.
I think that all the positives get buried under the rug because there's so many negatives, right? And
Yeah.
the problem that I think people have is some people just don't care and they just look at they don't watch the I mean like I think a lot of coastal elite liberals like us essentially are kind of consumed by the mainstream media a little bit too much.
Mhm.
Um, and I would consider people who I would previously say weren't part of the mainstream media like kind of part of it now, which is like you remember when Colbert was just like he was on Comedy Central or whatever, even Jon Stewart Comedy Central, like Jimmy Kimmel, whatever. Like these guys, they all kind of are part of this like comedian cabal who they
Yeah.
just and the hard part about it is like Trump is just out there producing comedy gold. So you can't just say no to that, you know? But I think that they need to fucking press refresh on their browser, dude. Like try to be funny about other things. You know what I mean? It's like every day, day after day, it's like all they can do is find his sound bites and make fun of them.
And it's actually, I think Trump is hyper aware of this also. And so he says things to send people into a tizzy, into their own like
He knows
You know,
they'll
he
respond.
knows the left's
He'll get more views.
and he can just jerk them into like over responding, overreacting, and then he's left in his own little like, okay, I can do whatever I want because they're over there talking about what I said about this random thing. And so I totally agree. And it's weird to me now, like if you think about the TV environment, the national TV environment, if I was a Republican, like a deep Trump supporter, I would find it very hard to find those outlets palatable. So what would I do? I'm going to go to, private right wing kind of podcast environment, which is exactly what's happened. And now you have this split screen media environment
He has
that,
Truth Social. He's literally there's literally like entire population of people who that's
yeah.
where they consume their
But what I
information.
mean is also like all these like podcasts, this whole podcast network of right wing, like part of that's created by the left's media dominance in the standard spaces, and then moving so far to the left that they're like publicly anti-Trump. That the reflection of that is, well, I need spaces that I can go to, that are for me, So, anyways, dude, I gotta jump off. But do you want to do a quick recap, or what do you want to talk about next week, kind of thing, or just sign off?
Yeah, I mean, I like how the conversation flowed today. I think we can continue the conversation. We could doesn't necessarily have to always be political. It could be like other things. But I think this is obviously really fresh off the
Yeah,
dome. We just had the election 2 days ago. And so yeah, let's just meet again next week and
try
chat
this time next week. Yeah,
and maybe we could incorporate other types of things too, like whatever else, whatever other topics that we want to talk about. But um, this is one that's really fresh, so I think we're all thinking about this stuff. I think that there's going to be a considerable movement within the United States left wing, the United States Democratic Party. I don't think it's really left wing party anymore in many ways. So that'll be an ongoing conversation.
yeah, and I'd like to talk to you about some Bay Area stuff. I think that'd be fun
Yeah.
to do some Bay Area
Hey,
politics, ethics, some tech
Christian
stuff, yeah,
McCaffrey
some
in the
Niner
lineup
stuff,
this week. Yeah.
and
Christian McCaffrey's in
also
the lineup. The Warriors beat the Celtics yesterday
I saw
handily.
that.
Not
Yeah.
handily, it was a close game, but
How's your elbow, by the way? Playing golf tomorrow?
I would be down. I just have something at 3.
But you can
But
play
yeah,
physically.
I could physically play. Yeah.
All right, I'll text you.
Okay.
All right, man.
All right. Signing off. Bye.
Bye.